All right. All right, guys. Welcome everyone to our first Anvil Q&A. I know there's a lot of questions around Anvil. It's been really exciting to see this thing evolve from what it used to be, Ampera, coming out to be Anvil. Everything that we've been working on, we're excited to share it with you guys. And I want to introduce my colleague, the head of product of Anvil, M. He's a brilliant guy and really excited for you guys to hear him.
Yeah. Hey guys, thanks, Bubby. Bubby's been huge in terms of teaching me how to get all this stuff stood up. Thank you guys for coming. It's profoundly weird to talk to faceless people. So don't be afraid to talk in chat or whatever. Prove your proof of life kind of thing. Yeah, I'm super pumped you guys are here. I think it's really important that we all just kind of regroup as a community before we actually get to launch. I wanted to do this before tomorrow. Tomorrow, the kind of that last of the first configuration proposals is going to be executed, and the protocol is basically ready to go. So because of that, I just want to clear up some misconceptions, kind of give you guys a state of the world as what's going on. I didn't really want to do it on Twitter or anywhere that's like, I think, more public until we like kind of have some sense of consensus as a group in terms of what this protocol does and why it's exciting and why the world needs it. So yeah, you guys, the early adopters, the Anvil holders, the protocol champions, you guys are the front line as far as as far as I'm concerned. And it's a really important part of any decentralized organization, right? Is to have a core community that new members can learn from and ask questions to. You guys have been great about answering each other's questions in the Discord. Obviously, I'll try and get to as many as possible. Bubby will help out. Other guys at the foundation will jump in to try and do that stuff. But having a well-informed kind of core community is super important to me. And I know that there's not a ton of information out there. Obviously there's the white paper and there's the Medium article from back in June, but for the most part, that's about it outside of the fairly limited docs that we have on the anvil.xyz site. And I'm sure that there's, varying degrees of like technical fluency here and people that, may have gotten Anvil in a claim contract, or maybe people have actually been really tracking this whole thing from the beginning. And so for the people that, this may be too broad of a conversation and want to get more technical, we have that dev chat channel on the Discord. Feel free to jump in there and ask like super technical questions. That stuff makes me happy. I'm totally pumped to get into that stuff. And also, if this is, maybe a little bit over your head or you don't necessarily care so much about some of the details, I'm sorry if this is a bit long-winded. I'm deputizing Bubby to be the official cop here at any time. Like I'm just going off, to kind of bring me back to reality if I'm losing you guys. But yeah. So as far as like the format for this thing, what I'm thinking is I'm going to give you guys a broad timeline of where we're at and where we're going. Kind of a protocol overview, a top-down view of what it is and what it's not, almost more importantly, what it does and what it doesn't do. Its main concepts, including the vault, letter of credit, contract, and the time-based collateral pools. Those are all kind of laid out on the docs as they exist right now, but they're fairly small. Those docs are going to get augmented quite a bit in the next week to talk about all the kind of individual aspects of it that I'm going to get into here. But this has been super helpful for me in terms of like writing docs that make sense and address the kinds of questions and misconceptions we might have out there. I'll do a very brief review of the governance process and what proposals are out there and what's passed and what's coming up, and then we'll do questions. And so a bunch of you have submitted questions in advance and upvoted each other's questions. I will definitely tackle that stuff, and then if time permits, we'll do just kind of open questions that I'll just pull out of chat as they come up. Obviously we're not going to go on forever, but it's important that I feel like, we clear as much of this up as possible and all get on the same page as we hurtle towards launch, because we are full speed ahead with this stuff. And there's going to be a lot of announcements and landmarks that are going to be hit, almost daily moving forward for the next few weeks. And so it's important that us as a tight community, all gets on the same page before all this stuff happens. Awesome. All right, so broad Anvil timeline. So I'm not going to get to the specifics of any like specific announcements and try and get ahead of all that. I'm going to let that kind of happen in its own course, but there are some important milestones I think you guys should know. Yesterday, and today we've published our contract repo. You guys probably noticed that on Etherscan, all those contracts have been verified. You can see those contracts on Etherscan, but now we have a public repo on GitHub that has all the contracts. I spent quite a bit of time along with our CTO putting together README that kind of explains each of the different contracts and a brief description as to how it pieces together with the whole protocol. So check those out. And obviously, as always, do AOR, get into the code, figure out how it works for sure. So that's out now. We're going to be publishing our audit results at least by the end of this week, if not the beginning of the week. We've been audited multiple times by more than one institution. So we're excited to share those just in the vein of transparency and to show that we're trying to do everything we can to be as secure as possible about this stuff. So those will go up as well. Early next week, those new docs I was mentioning about like expanding the protocol concepts to talk in much more granularity, those will go up. In the middle of next week, we're gonna have our full DApp launch. Now, importantly, it's not the launch. Like we'll do a whole thing around that. But the full functionality of the DApp for those of you that have been to the DApp so far, right now it's just the governance tab where you can see your voting power and all that that's live. But the collateral vault and generating letter of credits will be live. So even though tomorrow's proposal going live will allow you to create locks by interacting with the contract directly, our DApp will get launched at the middle of next week. And you guys can poke around and see a lot of what I'm talking about here today. We're also going to be announcing in the next few weeks a bug bounty program, again, more towards transparency and security that we're really excited about. We've already kind of locked down a partner there, and it should be great. And then obviously the official launch, where we'll do another long form Medium post where we talk about all this stuff, the state of the world, and also we have some exciting announcements coming up around. I know we kind of teased some incentives and stuff like that, so that will all kind of be laid out, and that'll be by the end of this month. And then beyond that, we've got tons of stuff in the works. I know KVIRZI said, what institutions and partners are involved in discussions of interest? Are there third parties waiting on the sidelines for this to go live? So like I said, I'm not going to get ahead of any of that stuff. We do have some great integration partners already identified, but I'm going to let them announce on their own timeline. As far as I'm concerned, like our part is pretty much done. Like we did the contracts and all that. So the ball is kind of in their court, and we obviously don't want to get ahead of them for their business and everything. But the foundation is totally committed to trying to make integration as smooth as possible and giving as much docs and guidance and of course, providing a forum to hash out all that stuff. So for sure, I think those things will happen. But I'm not here to like get ahead of any of that stuff. Okay. So yeah, go for it.
I'll say, I think the community will understand that. And as our partners start announcing this stuff, it'll all come out. It'll be exciting, and just got to be patient.
Yeah, a lot of exciting stuff going on for sure. So let's go over the protocol overview, and then we can break down the individual aspects of it. So Anvil is a decentralized finance protocol for the issuance of fully secured credit. It does this by allowing creation, modification, transfer, and redemption of digital collateral. This is all about collateral. What it's not, and I think this is probably the biggest thing that I've seen both on Twitter and on Discord, it's not a lending platform. The point is not to issue a lock to borrow against your own collateral. And it's not like a compounder in Aave. And I know that a couple different people, KevRev77 and Time Bomb, have kind of asked about that aspect of it. But building that would be kind of redundant and not particularly innovative because these guys have kind of done really well, right? So we actually built a lot on their governance model and how they handle risk and all that stuff, but built something new that's really important. But I can totally understand the confusion because usually in the real world, when you're talking about collateral, you're usually talking about maybe taking out a loan against it or something like that, right? So it totally makes sense. And I'm going to talk more on that in a minute when we get to letter of credits. But I want to address that it is not a lending platform. But Tyler does talk a lot about the use of collateral, in the white paper from a historical perspective. He talks about in the present and what his future is. So a lot of that's in the white paper. And he makes it clear that collateral is the backbone of the global economy and our financial systems. And this is kind of why Anvil was created, to modernize our financial systems and not just DeFi. This includes TradFi. And I think one of the biggest value props that we have here is how usable this is for traditional finance. as well as to make both of them more efficient. There really isn't a great efficient way of handling collateral, especially digital collateral right now. And that's where we intend to tackle, that aspect and contribute that to the world. Neemer, who, by the way, I think that's how you say it, Neemer, this guy's awesome. Like, he's been here since the early days of our Discord launching and has been super active. So thank you for the question. He said, what are the key milestones you're looking to reach in the next 6 to 12 months? I.e., what are some of the criteria you're looking at to determine if the project is successfully progressing? This is like a really good question. And some of it's, I don't know, but for the most part, it's protocol usage, right? Up until now, this has all been theory. We've done everything possible to talk in advance with like potential use cases to figure out like what the world needs and build something that we think it needs. But now it's time to see how it gets used, right? And from that, we're going to learn a lot. Like, what is the next step here? Do we start using this to build bridges to L2s, right? Do we decide that, actually there's something other than a letter of credit or a collateral pool, some other kind of collateral mechanism that's going to make the financial system, much more efficient? I'm not sure, but I do know that we have a lot of like great use cases for doing it with this. And then where we iterate from here is kind of, it's also just not even our decision fully as a foundation, right? This is a decentralized organization. Anyone could put forward a proposal to try and move this forward in any particular direction. And as far as like the metrics, like to me, like TVL is a big one here, right? Because the proof is in the pudding, right? If people are using this and there's value in our ecosystem, it shows that it's being highly trafficked, and it shows that like it's being adopted. So for me, it's like, that's what I'm planning on learning, at least in the next, between now and the end of the year. And I feel like by Q1, maybe we'll do another one of these and we'll start to talk about like, hey, where do we see this going? Like, there's so many things we can go from here, but like, what makes the most sense? What are we seeing on the ground? And I think you'll see that with some of these early use cases. As far as the protocol concepts go, all right. So the three big ones I talked about: the collateral vault, letter of credit, and the time-based collateral pools. The collateral vault is really the protocol's bedrock. It's used to house all the collateral for the entire protocol. And it's almost all the time your collateral will be in the vault, regardless of whether it's being utilized or not. There are some exceptions, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on when it comes to like letter of credits and liquidation and everything. But the point is, the vault is the security of the whole protocol, and it lives there. So what you'll see when you start using the DApp next week is that when you go to the vault, you'll see that there's a balance associated with each token that the protocol supports. And there'll be a total balance, and there'll be an available balance and a reserved balance. And so basically the way the protocol works from like a high level is that like, yeah, you may take some collateral and use it to issue a lock. But really all that's doing is that collateral is still in the vault, and we're just reserving it so it can't be used in the creation of another lock, and it can't be withdrawn. And that keeps everything in there at all times. The same thing goes for the time-based collateral pool. It just gets moved to a vault account associated with that pool. And I'll get into more of that in a little bit. But so the vault is really important from that aspect. It creates the master list for all the ERC20s that the protocol supports. So you've probably seen that in the second proposal that went out with our initial list of token support. As well as it keeps a list of all the approved collateralizable contracts. So that's basically saying any contract that wants to interact with our vault needs to be approved by governance. And so that's kind of an important piece, because yes, obviously we want our own contracts to be able to interact with it. But when it comes to external contracts, like people standing up staking pools, that's something that's going to have to go through governance, and I think for good reason. So that's something that, just think about this as a community, we're going to have to tackle as these proposals come up. Okay, so letter of credit, this is obviously a big one. It's where a lot of the questions were. But at a high level, letter of credit is collateral between two individual parties, right? And a collateral pool is like multiple people pooling collateral together for collective benefit. So letter of credit between two individual parties, an issuer and a beneficiary. You'll see in the code we refer to it as a creator. It might not be the best descriptor, because yeah, they create it, but then they're really the issuer in this case. And at its core, it's a guarantee to the beneficiary that they will have access to funds should they choose. And that's really kind of the value of the collateral and where it separates us from the lending protocol. It's like it's not guaranteed that the other side, that the beneficiary is actually going to redeem any of that. And I think the point, and you go back to Tyler's white paper, is that like, you don't actually need all of that. You just need to know the business world needs to know, the financial world needs to know that you're good for it, right? And that's enough to be able to operate. So yeah, this guarantee is done via reserving collateral, which lives in the vault, which I mentioned just before. And collateral can either be in the form of the same token as the credited amount or different token. And so this is where I want to kind of get to the first new terminology that I want us all to use as a community. So in the past, you've probably seen me refer to this as the two kinds of locks, as unconverted locks and converted locks. It's mentioned in the white paper. It's mentioned in the proposals. I find this a bit confusing because you have two different things going on here. You have two kinds of locks, but then you also have like the process by which these locks undergo. So like the term unconverted lock almost seems like, oh, well, it naturally has to get converted. And conversely, a converted lock seems like, oh, it was probably unconverted before. And so in order to like dispel this, the whole foundation's on board with trying to reframe this as, instead of unconverted locks, we're going to call it a dynamic lock, which is anything that's a moving target with two assets, two different assets in a pair. And then a static lock is just a one-to-one lock, exactly the same amount of one token that's guaranteeing credit in the same exact token. So I think that helped, because then when we talk about converting, we're talking about that process. And if you look in the code in the letter of credit thing, we really don't refer to unconverted locks and converted locks. We just refer to the convert lock function. So, this is pretty compatible with the way that the code works. So moving forward, instead of U locks and C locks, we'll call them U locks and S locks. Cool. So let's start with static locks, because they're probably the simplest to understand. Like I said, it's the exact same asset in the exact same amount. You cannot create a static lock if it's not exactly like that. The good news is that there's very little risk associated with the static lock, right? Because you don't need to go and get this thing. It's reserved in the vault in exactly that amount. It's claimable instantaneously, near instantaneously. It's already there. So that means it's not subject to liquidation. It's not subject to the limitation. So if you guys remember from the third proposal where we configure the lock, the one that's going to be executed tomorrow, you see these things like global max in use and global and max per lock. These do not apply to static locks because you can have it as much as you want, but it's all guaranteed here. And then it's just simply available on demand. So those are very easy to understand. And then a dynamic lock deals with the asset pairing complexity, right? So these are subject to market conditions and all that stuff. Sovereign Nations says, can you outline some of the risks involved in governance and for each party using locks, parentheses, low liquid tokens, beneficiary trust, liquidation, et cetera? Yeah, exactly. So like all this stuff should be pretty familiar to people that have used Compound or anything like that. So yeah, the market conditions are like liquidity limitations, right? How available is this token to get on demand, right? Because at its core, we're trying to say, no matter what happens, this credited amount is good. And you can imagine why, from a business or integration perspective, just getting this letter of credit saying like, this is guaranteed, this is fully guaranteed and secure, is huge in order for, to enable financial transfers and all that stuff. So in order to do that, it needs to be available. So it needs to be liquid enough, and it needs to be able to withstand price fluctuations, right? And to answer the other part of his question is beneficiary trust. Yeah, this is not entirely trustless. Like you do kind of have to trust the beneficiary a little bit, that they're not just going to redeem it out from under you. But look, and this is kind of where I'm a bit of a realist here. As much as we love to wax philosophical about how, the future of blockchain is like, there won't be laws anymore. It'll just be smart contracts. Well, that's kind of bullshit, right? There's still laws. And if somebody screws you over, you can take them to court and all that. So there is a certain amount of trust, but I don't think you can get rid of that last little bit of trust that they could redeem the lock, in a malicious way, because there's other mechanisms to try and settle that. It's just not at a technical level. But yeah, you have to price in liquidity and price fluctuations and all that stuff. And obviously, in order to ensure these locks, they need to be sufficiently over collateralized. How much is needed to over collateralize? Well, that's why we set these collateral factors by governance in the first place. So looking back to the third proposal, right, we create three things when it comes to any asset pair that's going to be used in dynamic locks. The creation collateral factor, which is usually the more conservative than the liquidation collateral factor. So there's a certain collateral factor you need in order to create the lock in the first place, a certain collateral factor that if you were to cross, it would be subject to liquidation, and then the incentive given to the liquidator is the third aspect in each of these things. And so those are like, this is for anyone who's like tracked, compounds, governance and everything like that. They use this kind of risk DAO called Gauntlet that helps provide risk parameters. This is really a community effort to like make sure that our risk parameters are set correctly. And it's something that, we've talked about engaging with firms with and all that stuff. But like, this is something that we should take seriously anytime a proposal comes to change these parameters and how we want to support these things, especially when it comes to, hey, we want to support a new token. Let's talk about like why we should set these parameters the way that we are. And importantly, we should note that these are not two ways. So what you'll see, so even though we have wrapped Ether, USDC and USDT supported in the lock contract as of proposal 3, what you'll notice is it takes 6 different asset pairs to configure them because they're not two-way. Just because one token, token A as the collateral token and token B as the credit token, that collateral factor might be different than if you swap them. In the case of this proposal, they're not. They're symmetrical. But you can imagine a world in which, think about it like this. The collateral token already exists. We already have it in the vault. That's not at risk, right? It's more, can we sell that thing and can a liquidator buy the other thing, right? And so there's market conditions in which those two things might not be symmetrical. So we should always kind of take those into consideration as well. And then when it comes to liquidation, this is a big one, right? So the liquidation process is just simply the process of converting a dynamic lock into a static lock. And that happens for a number of different reasons, but it's in order to guarantee the full credit amount. Like I said, that's bedrock. You have to be able to say, no matter what happens, this lock is good for the beneficiary, right? So to do that, like who can do that? And when can they do that? So prior to the liquidation threshold being reached, the creator can initiate it, or the beneficiary can initiate it. But the beneficiary initiates it through redeem. So if the beneficiary says, hey, it's time for me to come, I'm going to redeem some of this lock, what has to happen is the requisite amount of collateral needed goes through the liquidation process to convert it into the exact amount needed, and then it's released to them. A creator can convert the lock themselves, and you might be like, well, why the hell would you want to convert this lock, and be subject to liquidation? Because there's a point in which, okay, imagine this. Imagine you have this D lock in place and you're nearing that threshold, the liquidation threshold, and you know that you're going to be subject to this 8% fee that's going to go to a liquidator if you were to cross it. And let's say you don't have enough collateral to add on to it. You can always modify collateral in the lock so that if the collateral amount actually inflates in value, you can take some out of it because you're like, I'm way too over collateralized. I can pull some of this out. Or if you're under collateralized and you're nearing liquidation, you can add more collateral into it to make it a healthier lock. But if you really don't have any more collateral to add to that whole thing, you say, hey, I'm going to get liquidated probably. You could convert it yourself and keep that 8% yourself. So that's an important mechanism that I think is like important to talk about, is that like it's not necessarily a rando or a bot that has to liquidate it for you. You could liquidate it yourself. And this actually gets into a good question that was asked by Sovereign Nations. He said, seeing how important it is to convert the ULOC quickly, if the risk factor is greater than or equal to the collateral factor, is the foundation running bots, or do we have known devs that will be running bots to handle the conversion? Okay. It's a really good question. The short answer is yes, the foundation is running a liquidation bot. Now, in a perfect world, the economics are such that we've made a significant enough liquidation fee, and that's on a per asset pair level, to make it worth anyone's while to liquidate it to claim 8% of it, right? And that's kind of how the system self-polices itself. It's like, yeah, only the creator or the beneficiary could really like force a conversion of a lock until you hit that threshold. And then once that happens, it's fair game. Anyone can submit a transaction to liquidate the lock and keep that 8%, right? So in theory, like everyone should be incentivized to do that. But in practice, it's totally possible right out of the gate that like there just won't be people that are doing that. So we stood up a bot to process it as a fallback just in case, obviously, because we want to guarantee those locks. Right now, the way that it's working is that the 8% fee that we get for liquidating our bot, we're just putting into the collateral vault. So it's going to live alongside those withdrawal fees in that pot of money that governance, we all can decide what happens with it. In addition, then this is like a relatively recent addition in the last couple of weeks, we've decided we're going to stand up a smart contract that will allow anyone to process a liquidation. And what it'll do is it'll send that 8% back to the person who initiated it, which is a really cool thing. And we're going to do it through the DApp. So if you had that thing happen where you're like, shit, I need to convert this thing before it liquidates, you could go through our DApp, click the button, sign the transaction. It will go to the smart contract, and that 8% will go back to your wallet, which is, I think, a cool little value add that we're preparing to do, because it's just, not everybody can stand up a smart contract just for them in case, their lock gets liquidated. So I think that's kind of cool. And yeah, so, but like, just to hammer home this point about us not being a lending platform, the point is not to get liquidated. That's not a good thing. You don't want to pay this 8% plus the 50 bit withdrawal fee as it exists right now. Look, there's a lot here to get into. There's a lot more details, and like we can talk about it more async on on Discord or anything, but that's kind of the overview of like how these things behave, and hopefully separating out that concept between a dynamic lock and a static lock and the conversion that happens. You could just go and create a static lock. It doesn't need to start as a dynamic lock. You could just say, hey, all I need to do for this, like, it's more about like, what is the person that's going to receive this letter of credit? What are they expecting? If they need a stable coin, if they need USDC, then great. Like that we already know half of the equation. Now it's about what collateral do I have that can back that, and doesn't necessarily need to be in a risk, like subject to risk dynamic lock. And so like, let's talk about some use cases, because I think this will help like actually hammer home the point, right? So we're talking about lending, and like I said, this is adjacent to lending, but it's not a lending protocol. So let's imagine this example. Let's imagine we are long crypto. I know it's a fucking crazy idea that we in this community would be long crypto, right? But we still live in a fiat-based society, right? So if we want to have access to fiat, right? Well, what do we need? I mean, in a lot of places, you need a credit score, or you need a bank account with a significant enough balance, or you need some illiquid form of collateral, like a house or a car or something like that. Just by living in general, you need access to that kind of stuff. And so there is this real example where a third party that's issuing loans in fiat could accept letters of credit and say, hey, this is fully secured. I can lend against this. I can issue credit against this. If you give me $100,000 in USDC as a credited amount in a lock, I'll give you a credit card with a $100,000 limit, and I know you're good for it. And so that's a super exciting model, because we've seen a lot of these like crypto debit cards pop up lately, but really think about what they're doing there, right? It's like they're selling you out of your position in order to pay for the transaction. Well, what the hell was the point of that? I could have sold out of my position if I wanted to sell out of my position, right? Think about the fact that like you could do this whole thing. I could take out a mortgage against all the Bitcoin that I have, right? And wrap Bitcoin or whatever it is, all the wrapped Ether I have. And I can pay that back over time, over 30 years. And at the end of the day, I still got my collateral. Once I'm released from that whole thing, I never sold out of my position. I didn't have a taxable event happen, anything like that. So there's a lot of like really exciting shit in there. Amtastic asks, could a bank benefit from using the Anvil protocol? If so, how? Totally. And this is why I'm so pumped about the TradFi stuff. Because there's this like, think about lending in general, right? What are you usually using as collateral? A house, a car, something illiquid, right? And these banks have to staff, right? Repo people and people that are going to, okay, well, now we tried to seize your house and get you out of it. And then we have to sell it. But what if the market's down and we don't know the condition of your house and all that shit? And like, think about what it's like to say, I have fully secured credit ready to go. You can't lose. When a bank can start issuing loans against you can't lose because it's fully secured, they're going to give you a better interest rate, right? Because you're like, there's no risk built into this whole thing. Now think about what that's going to do to the market when all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, if I go this crypto, not only do I have crypto and I can take advantage of this, like I might want to get involved in crypto. Now I can get a more favorable interest rate because that's all guaranteed. That's super exciting to me, right? Another great example I think of, when people think of letters of credit, right? Sometimes people think of international trade. So if I'm I'm an American business and I want to, start selling something, and I'm going to go to some factory in China and say, hey, I need 200,000 units in order to stand my business. What they're going to say is like, okay, great. That's going to take 6 weeks. We need something to prove, some kind of collateral. So what normally happens, I go to my bank and I say, hey, you got to issue a letter of credit to that Chinese bank, who will then tell the factory guy, yeah, you're like yes, they're good for it, and they go back and forth. This takes time, and it's have to sign, and they start the thing, they send it over to you, then you make a payment, then they really like all this stuff happens. It takes weeks. It's super efficient. People are getting raked for their coals on both sides with fees. Now imagine I could send you something near instantaneously that proves that like you are entitled to this money, and you could start production right now. That's just a like a market efficiency thing. And this is like, as much as I like love the crypto space, a lot of it has been based on like education and getting people to understand it. But when there's real economic benefit in this stuff, like we're going to see mass adoption. And I think this is going to help create the rails on which like international trade happens. And then the last one, and this is probably the silliest one, but I think it's the one I use for like my normie friends about why the letter of credit system is so good. Like, I don't know if you guys have ever like been to casinos, but imagine you walk in a casino, right? And what do you see? Sometimes you see these high rollers that they're giving them, oh, we're going to give you a line of credit. We'll give you a marker, whatever. Like, but that's based off of reputation and all that stuff. Imagine if you walk into a casino, go up to the cage, scan a QR code with their beneficiary address, issue them a lock for 100K in USDC, and they give you 100,000K in chips. And then they say, look, pay it back, don't pay it back. We don't give a shit because we can always redeem it and get that full value back. And imagine you go and you win 20,000. Well, now you go back, you cash it, you get 20,000 in cash, you give back your 100,000, they release you from your underlying collateral. And that can happen at 4 a.m. You don't need any bank to be open, any business holiday, any of that shit. Like you can get that right now. That's the level of efficiency we're talking about. It's like, we don't need to, adhere to banking hours or any of that stuff. There's real utility in this. Okay, I'll move on. Time-based collateral pools. Multi-party funded pools to produce collateral for a single claimant's use. Contributing to the pools via staking any ERC-20s that the vault supports. This is important. I'll talk about this a little bit more when we talk about token support, but anything that the vault supports, a staking pool will support. So what it does is it actually transfers the collateral from your vault account to the equivalent pool's vault account, and in exchange, it gives you pool units in sync with the per token per pool basis. So maybe you gave both USDT and wrapped ETH to this pool. You'll get the equivalent amount of units in both, and then you can unstake. But the big upgrade from this time-based collateral pool model over traditional staking pools is that it's super predictable and trustless in the unstaking process. You guys might have noticed this elsewhere where like the unstaking process is kind of murky. It might require approval. There's a lot of like, there's a lot of, lack of auditability that can happen there, right? So everything here is based on units of time called epochs. So when you stand up a pool, what you're actually doing is you're saying, okay, this is the unit of time that we're going to use. So like imagine it's 1 day. And if I decide I want to take out my collateral from this and it's the middle of day Monday, then by the end of day Tuesday, that's when that gets processed. And that ensures fairness on both sides. So if you're the claimant and you're depending upon this collateral to be able to operate, you know that you have a day and a half or whatever it is to be able to claim funds against that. And if you're unstaking, you know exactly when that's going to be available for release, right? So like this is, I think this is a pretty big upgrade in the pool model. It follows a beacon proxy pattern, which might be a little bit in the weeds for some of you guys, but I can send you some stuff to look it up. It'll be in the docs as well. And really the benefit of that is it just separates out the logic. We have this time-based collateral pool singleton that has all the logic for how the pools work that governance owns. Governance also owns our beacon proxy. And then all you're doing when you set up a pool is you're setting up a proxy contract that just holds the state. So it looks to the singleton for all the logic on how everything works. But all the proxy has is, the ledger as to who's owed what and who's unstaking and all that stuff. And that creates it makes it maximally lightweight, but it also makes it like maximally upgradable. So we can do bulk upgrades. If governance decides we have a security patch or we decide we want to add more functionality or something like that to the logic in the time-based collateral pool singleton, then we can upgrade everyone at the same time without having to like redo all these different implementations of it, which I think is really cool. But it's important to note that if you want to stand up a collateral pool, you do have to submit a proposal that the collateral vault accepts that as a collateralizable contract. Like I said, the collateral vault keeps the record of which contracts are allowed to interact with it. So that's just something to think about in terms of governance. And as far as use cases, somebody asked a question, could you give us an example of who might use a time-based collateral pool and why? This sounds like something Flex would be interested in. but curious in other use cases. Yeah, there's like plenty of use cases here. The insurance model comes to mind in terms of like saying, hey, we're all going to collectively put in and then, into a pot. And if something happens, it can be taken out by a claimant. Obviously, the staking model is a big one. But importantly, the protocol isn't prescriptive in terms of why you would stake something. That's usually handled on the other side. So let's say, for example, you earn rewards or something for staking or some kind of interest rate or something like that. You basically want to stand up a companion rewards contract that then would send the rewards to the wallet addresses of the people in the pool. And the pool just acts as it just acts as a state of collateral and how that collateral gets reduced over time, but doesn't handle any kind of like full cycle rewards thing. And that's kind of by design. So those are the three big protocol concepts. Like I said, you'll see a lot of that stuff in the docs coming up. Just really quickly on governance. The entire protocol is subject to governance. Governance is ownership, either directly or indirectly, over all of the core contracts. There's a ton of responsibility that falls to governance to address, including token support, collateral factors and risk mitigation, withdrawal fee amounts and allocation, contract upgrades, etc. In order to make changes, any account, so this all exists on Discord, but just so everybody understands, you need to have been delegated at least 500 million Anvil, which is 0.5% of the total supply, in order to submit a proposal. And then what you do is you go to forum.anvil.xyz, and explain the proposal and why it's needed in a new topic post. And then you wait 72 hours, submit it on chain. There's a 2-day waiting period for governance review, 5-day voting period. Everybody that's like voted on these last 3 proposals knows this like the back of their hand at this point, but I know we have some newcomers here. If the proposal passes, there's a 7-day time lock before it goes into effect. And then to recap the existing proposals that have already gone through, the first one was accepting governance ownership over the core contracts. That's just saying, hey, governance now controls this. 2, configuring the vault with that initial token support. And 3, the one that's going to be executed tomorrow, which is configure the lock-related parameters. So that's like which ERC20s we're supporting in the lock contract, the collateral factors, pricing oracle configurations. One thing I do want to talk on right here before I get to the rest of the questions is there is different levels of token support. I know I mentioned this in the general channel, like maybe a month ago or something, but like there are situations in which we as governance might say, hey, this token isn't super liquid. We might not want to support it for the creation of locks, but we might want to support it for staking pools, and we might want to support it as collateral in the vault. We can create that disambiguation because whatever's configured in the collateral vault is also usable in staking pools. But beyond that, the lock contract, which is what this third proposal is all about, has to support it. And so like things could be supported outside of the lock contract. And so that way you're like, hey, I think this token might be too risky to support in locks, but it could be used by the rest of the protocol. So there is that level of token support that everyone should be aware of. So when you see a new proposal come in, you really think about like, what does this mean? Is this mean for locks or does this mean just for collateral and staking? Because collateral and staking is fairly low risk compared to dynamic locks. Okay, advanced. These are the questions that we were asked in advance. I think I got to just about everyone. I tried to throw some of them in the explainers as they became relevant. Blah blah blah. As a reminder, the topic of this Q&A is protocol and its governance. I'll not be covering token pricing, anything AMP related. There's a separate Discord for that. Talk to Bobby if you want to talk about AMP or getting ahead of any integration announcements. Okay, Bagsick, who also awesome guy, very active dude in this community, and super excited about his participation. I'm interested in learning how Anvil came to be. Why did the acronym team feel the need to create a new lock coin? What was their vision, short-term and long-term? Who was involved in developing the new protocol? So I'm not 100% sure what we mean by lock coin, but like Anvil token is a governance token. It's meant for participation in this community. But as far as how we came to be, like, I think the short answer is what I was saying before, that there was no efficient use of collateral in both decentralized finance and traditional finance and that bridge in between. So I think that's really the impetus, but I think the best person to answer that is Tyler. And I know Tyler's got some speaking engagements coming up and he has some content he's going to be putting out that addresses this directly. So I think you guys should hear it from him because he predates me on all of this and this is kind of his brainchild. So yeah, but good question. Lee asks, can you give a breakdown of Anvil's tokenomics? Like I said, I'm not going to get involved in the pricing, but what I will say is like, I mean, a lot of this is available in the Medium article. 100 billion Anvil. near 60% or so were in that claims contract. And then there's allocations outside of that. That's all kind of listed out there. But in terms of like the value of the token, at least insofar as I see it, is it's a governance token, right? It's really just meant to say like how, like, do you want to participate in the operations of this protocol, how it operates, how parameters get set, what we do with fees, all that stuff. And, where does it go from here? Do we want to upgrade contracts? Do we want to, do any of that stuff? And so I think it would stand to reason that the value of the contract, and this is just me speaking personally, like the more this gets used, the more TVL we get, the more, big, protocols or businesses or whatever decide to use this and we see more collateral in the vault. Like I would imagine that the Anvil value is derivative of how useful it is to participate in a high leverage protocol like this. So that's all I'll say on that. Again, like I don't really do, we as a community don't really do like Anvil pricing talk and all that stuff, but its value is derived from participating in governance here, which I think has a lot of value, especially as we see more and more traffic on it. Itzmer says, theoretically, anything can be collateralized, but what is the first category / transaction / space where you think this protocol will get its foot in the door? Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. There's a lot of, I think I laid out a bunch of different use cases here in terms of like where the first one is. I think I would just wait for the first few integrations to see like, what the market's saying the first use case is going to be. Like there's tons of utility here. And as far as like what can be collateralized and all that, I mean, there's so many ways we can go with real world assets and all kinds of stuff with that. Yeah. So I think I'll just wait to see that play out. But like I'd say wait a couple months, see how it's getting used, and like that should probably answer itself. Drew says, once fully live, will the Anvil website list all active applications that are using Anvil's lock system? Will we have insight into which apps are using by volume? Okay, interesting. The short answer is some of this is unknowable. We don't necessarily know. The beauty of this whole thing is it's smart contracts that could be interacted with by just about anybody, right? So like it's possible that there are locks that we see are happening on chain that we don't know what's on the other side of that. Conversely, we do know where their staking pools are, right? Because those things need to be accepted into the collateral vault as an approved contract. So you will be able to get like a readout of which staking pools are out there and all of that. And if you belong to a lot of staking pools, what your balances are, that's all kind of DApp support that we're working on doing. But as far as locks go, you'll be able to see where the big locks are. I mean, it's obviously a public ledger, but we don't necessarily know. So, I mean, like there are integration partners who have announced their integration. So like those will know. And when we have those partners, I'm sure we'll put them on the website as partners and use them as case studies and all that stuff. But it's totally possible that people are going to integrate with us and we don't even know. And that's kind of the beauty of this being a building block, is that people can build on top of it. So that's it for the advanced questions, I think. Bubby, anything you got before we just kind of jump into whatever people are talking about?
No. If anybody has any questions that they want to ask now, go ahead and drop them inside of the chat for this presentation. I believe it's protocol-Q&A. Some of you guys are already in there, so just go ahead and drop your questions.
I think they could just use this chat here, like on the.
Yeah, that's the one I'm referring to.
Oh, okay, sweet. Yeah. 0xRecT. Will the voting threshold remain around 5 billion at some point? Yeah. Okay. At some point in the future, when there's much more Anvil be circulating and both pass-fail thresholds are exceeded, will the proposal be rejected? Yeah, I mean, look, that's up to governance. I mean, this is all stuff that we can set. So this is, it's really not up to me or anyone individually. What I would say, I did see a question that I don't think I mentioned, and I'm sorry if I missed it. Somewhere, somebody asked the question of, like, are you worried that, a bad actor or something could come and buy up a ton of Anvil and like kind of just, overrun the governance? And like, look, that is possible for sure. I'd say it's pretty unlikely in the next year, just because 60% of everything is in this claims contract and it's all kind of locked up for a majority of the tokens out there. But I mean, it's a possibility. I mean, governance should address all these kind of internal and external threats and what that means for us. And yeah, it's just part of being in a decentralized organization. Can you talk more about staking as it relates to the protocol? Yeah, I mean, it's kind of up to how people use the implementation of it. There's a lot of different reasons that staking might occur, but that's really up to the people that stand up the pools and what they're expecting out of it and what the expected return is for staking anything. And like I said, it's meant to be really flexible and like obviously connected to this like what we believe is a very secure vault. There's a lot of value there. Can the protocol be used for lending similar to Aave? Yeah, I think I talked about that. It's not a lending protocol directly, but it's totally possible that that some business might accept letter of credits to issue you loans against. And I think I talked about why that might be beneficial. Have there been talks for any other organizations, DAOs, etc., use of Anvil? So we do have some like DAO friends that are definitely excited to start being involved in governance. A certain amount of our token was delegated even from like to certain DAOs to help vote and help create this initial governance structure. And then there's also DAOs we've talked to for other reasons. Like I said, I think one of the things we have to address is some of the risk as we see more proposals come in for different token support and everything like that. There are really great risk DAOs out there that could be great partners in terms of like help providing guidance as to where we should set these collateral factors, things like that. These are all things that the foundation's pursuing right now, but I think we as a decentralized organization should pursue as well. How many people are currently working on Arkham? How many people are actively working on Anvil? How many people are working on Ampere? How many? I'm not going to get into the Palace intrigue stuff of like what's going on under the hood here, but suffice to say, the smartest engineers I've ever worked with are working on this stuff. And the engineering for this thing is not limited to just us at the foundation. Anyone can submit proposals to change just about anything. Is U.S. regulation a concern? Have any influence on our upcoming adoption? Okay. I think short answer, and this is like kind of my personal view on it, like I don't think that has anything to do with this protocol. Like this is just a provable decentralized thing. How U.S. regulation could impact it, it's not us. It's whatever, companies might want to utilize this technology and they're subject to stuff. What I will say, and this is kind of a little bit of a gray area here, but there's this lock use case that's kind of like proving your credit worthiness. Like the thing I love about crypto, right, especially Ethereum and Bitcoin, is that it's provided this like economic lingua franca that's borderless, right? So if you can prove collateral, right, you can pledge collateral in any country for the benefit of anybody that has connection to a network. One could see how that could reduce the amount of complexity with regards to like moving money around and dealing with international regulation and all that stuff. I mean, I'll just give a hypothetical example. Imagine you're in a repressive country that doesn't allow you to invest in American businesses, but you have a cousin that they're starting a business over there and you want them to be able to like flourish and take advantage of it or whatever. Like you may not be able to move money out of your bank to them, but what you could do is create a letter of credit for their benefit on the other side, or to a company in the US that can issue them a loan. And now all of a sudden, like I said, kind of like not selling out of your position, you're really not moving funds, at least to my understanding. And I am not an expert on any of this stuff. But it's kind of interesting how borderless it is, because the mechanisms itself are really agnostic of where the collateral and the credit takes place. So good question. Anything else? I know I've been going on for quite a bit and got some playoff baseball.
Yeah, it looks like a couple more questions just came in.
Okay, I'll do these two and maybe we'll wrap up. Can assets be converted in the traditional sense in the vault? For example, if I'm staking AMP and AMP is not an approved lock asset, can I convert it to say USDC? Okay, so like I said before, you don't really want to use Anvil as a means to convert anything. I mean, there are so many, decentralized exchanges that can do that for you. But if you're staking AMP and AMP, can I convert it to say USDC? If it's not a lock, then you're not going to be able to issue credit against it to a beneficiary. Like I said, I don't think it would be efficient to issue it to yourself as a beneficiary. But it certainly, like, I don't know. Like, I would say just like use a decentralized exchange if you really want to convert it. Bag6 says there's questions in the main Q&A. Okay, look at that. Updated timeline or all about proposals now. Yeah, all the proposals, all the initial configuration proposals are done. So now it's kind of at like, hey, like if we want to get new token support, if there are integration partners that are looking to use us in a certain way that requires a proposal, we expect them to submit those. Let's see. Tyler said something along the lines of the Anvil protocol essentially allowing merchant payments to happen for free. Unless I'm mistaken, can you explain how that would work? I don't know. That's probably a good question for Tyler. One last thing. Let me just like kind of leave you guys on a vision of like how that, because like there was a lot of questions about, not necessarily for this, but prior to this, about withdrawal fees. And the reason that we set this withdrawal fee initially to 50 basis points, and again, governance can change this however they want, on the exit from the vault, is that we didn't want to put any barriers of entry for people to be able to participate in this protocol, right? I think as far as protocols go, this is a very low fee protocol, and it really only happens when you pull things out. And the goal was not to charge people fees. It was to like obviously find a way to make this protocol like have funding to do whatever initiatives that this governance wants to do with it. But there's a world in which there's so much utility on the other side of this vault that you can create locks and you can transfer. I don't think I mentioned that, but this is like a byproduct of the code. Like you could transfer vault to vault. So if you wanted to like Venmo someone from a vault, from your collateral vault to their collateral vault, you could do that without a fee. Just the gas it takes to do it. So it's like you could imagine a world in which you put collateral in this vault and you really don't ever have to pull it out because there's so much utility, because you can get loans against it, because you can stake and earn things against it, because you can transfer that collateral around. That's honestly like, my dream is that like there's so much utility on the other side of the vault that nobody's ever pulling it out of there. And it all just lives in this like very secure location. So yeah, like we don't view the withdrawal fee as something that like, hey, we're gonna, as governance, make a lot of money off of this. Like, no, it's meant to like, to keep the governance going. But for sure, there's this world in which like we can all just like live in this extended ecosystem. And Tyler's mentioned a lot of this, but I love the concept of bridging to TradFi. I think there's a lot of like L2 and sidechain use cases here for bridges. A lot of things around like instantly, like you guys have known anytime you're like transferring funds into or out of different exchanges and all this stuff, there's usually a fairly long period that it takes to settle these things, right? Well, locks can guarantee it as soon as it can be issued. So even if something's settling, the lock itself can allow you to can open up near instant functionality on your side because the receiving party knows that you're good for it. So there's a lot of ways to build efficiencies, especially in decentralized finances. Yeah, the Coinbase wallet thing, like that's kind of a known thing. It's not us. It's kind of happening all over the place, their integration. So I think a bunch of people have written some guidance, even on this Discord, about like how to kind of troubleshoot that. But yeah, hey guys, thanks for coming out. Thanks for spending your Wednesday evening with us if you're in the US. And yeah, I'm super excited about where we're at. We're gonna we're heading towards launch. There's a lot of like awesome things happening. I'll keep you guys updated. Maybe we'll do another one of these in a couple months. Like I said, there's going to be a ton of announcements coming out over the next month or two as we gear up towards like full launch and announce our integration partners and all that stuff. But yeah, thanks for listening to all this, and hopefully like this gives a better, this gives you a better sense of like what the protocol's capabilities are and what its like real world use cases are, and kind of sky's the limit in terms of where we go from here. And I'm excited to be a part of this community and try and move the ball forward. So thank you guys very much.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you guys later.